The Chicago Bears offense has had some rough moments at training camp. There's no sugarcoating it. But I think it's important to keep in mind that it's early. It's a new offense, it's a lot of new players, and all these early struggles are okay.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook, join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today, hopefully every day. On the show today, we get into some of these Bears offensive struggles and why it's not the end of the world just yet. Not time to panic this early in training camp. We'll go through some of the reasons as to why the offense might be struggling at this time and why many of those things are normal, reasonable, a part of this growing process of a new team coming together, and why that's okay. We'll hear from Justin Fields on some of the things he's seeing out there on offense, where he's seeing progress, where he still sees more room for improvement, and how he's taking it all in stride. And we'll kind of compare the Bears to some other teams that are also having training camp struggles that just don't seem to quite get the same attention or fervor or debate that we seem to be swirling around in and mediating on in Chicago right now. I think we shouldn't expect the Bears to just come into training camp all of a sudden like some well-oiled machine. And I find myself kind of looking around like, what did we expect, right? When we see people, there's this big thing on Twitter and social media right now where it's like Bears fans are mad at Bears media for reporting and talking about the negative things that they're seeing at Bears training camp. And there's this feeling or this idea like, this is just negative Bears media spin on what's going on out there, and that they're, intentionally painting a bleak picture for some reason. I've never really heard anyone give me a good reason as to why the Bears media would want to do that intentionally. But regardless, that's sort of the feeling and the words that you see a lot from Bears fans on Twitter. And of course, Bears media, for the most part, in broad brushstrokes here, in general, are just there to report what they're seeing. And they happen to be seeing a lot of, incomplete passes and miscommunications and poor blocking, plays blown up by the defense and plays by defensive players on the ball, pass breakups and interceptions and things, and fumbles forced and things like that. And for the most part, that's just Bears media reporting what they're seeing, and what they happen to be seeing right now happens to be a lot of negative things. But I just think that's sort of what we should be expecting, right? It's like, of course, when you have, first of all, a brand new offense for everyone but Equanimeous St. Brown, essentially, and Lucas Patrick, who's now got the broken thumb, but outside of like the two Green Bay Packers that they brought in this offseason, this specific offense and terminology is brand new to absolutely everyone. Some players have played in similar schemes that might have similar terminology, but this exact combination is brand new to the vast majority of the players on offense. So, of course, that's going to take some time for everyone, that they're learning the offense and getting more and more up to speed, but it's not second nature or natural to them, especially guys like N'Keal Harry that just got here, or Riley Reif or Michael Schofield that were not here all offseason to be picking it up through the voluntary workouts and OTAs and stuff. But so that by itself is going to take some time. And then on top of that, you have such a high rate of turnover on this Bears offense compared to last season. I mean, in terms of like returning starters, yeah, you got your quarterback, your running back, your tight end, and your wide receiver. But then outside of that, it's like one offensive lineman. I mean, Larry Borum did start last season a little bit, but was not like the every game starter. And then like completely brand new wide receivers, potentially 4 brand new offensive line starters, maybe 3, and then, backup tight ends and the other running backs and stuff. Like, there are a lot of new pieces in there that you have to get used to. And even then, like, that on its own is another thing that takes time and can slow some of the offensive development. Even if it was the same offense from last year, heaven forbid, but say hypothetically it was, but you had all of the same turnover, it would still be a bunch of new wide receivers that Justin Fields has to get used to, and some new tight ends, and obviously a new offensive line that all has to get used to each other. And so when you combine that, it's new players getting used to each other, and all of those new players, while simultaneously trying to get used to each other, are also getting used to then a new offense. Like, you have guys that you have a quarterback who's not going to be super familiar with the people he's throwing the ball to, and not super familiar with the play that the person he's throwing the ball to is running. So there's like multiple layers of learning curve here that all the players are getting around to and having to work through, that seems to pretty clearly add up to not the fastest start to training camp and a lot of mistakes being made. And that's okay. Like, this is the time to make mistakes. This is the time to struggle. This is the time to try new things and push for different opportunities and maybe attempt some throws in practice that, in a game situation, maybe I'm not going to try and force the ball there because it's just risky or whatever it might be. But in practice, there's not consequences to, so you push yourself to try that sort of thing. And on top of all that, the pads just came on like a few days ago. I think like right over the weekend there. So they've had 3 or 4 padded practices. There's been at least 1 day off in there already. So it's not like these guys are 3 weeks into training camp and still can't figure out how to get things together. Like, the real practices with pads and real contact, especially for the offensive line, just started. So it tends to overall be a slightly smaller sample size of struggles so far, in addition to all the reasons why we would expect them to be struggling so far, at least based on the reports. And that's sort of the other aspect of this that I want to get into, is that all we're getting is sort of snippets and snapshots of what's going on, but we're not necessarily getting all of the details or all of the full picture here. We'll kind of get Justin Fields' perspective on where the criticisms are valid and maybe where they're a little less valid on these training camp struggles next on Locked On Bears. We've all been in a point in our lives, there's no shame about it, to maybe you're a little tight on cash, right? I mean, it's happened before. You're feeling a little bit paycheck to paycheck. Maybe you got some bills coming up that you're worried about, or you're worried about filling up your gas tank all the way. Maybe you fill it halfway this time, the paycheck's coming around the corner, and you just feel some of that extra stress of maybe needing a little bit of cash. But our friends with Dave are here to help. You can thank yourself by signing up for Dave. Dave is the banking app that is here to help you get up to $500 cash instantly with their program that's called Extra Cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy a wedding gift, or catch up on bills. You can tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out. And the key part here, there aren't any hangups. There's no interest and there's no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief they need with Extra Cash. So if you find yourself in a pinch and need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an Extra Cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. It hasn't been all bad for this Bears offense at training camp, and that's an important distinction we need to make here. It's not that they have done nothing right and that there's been no progress and no development or whatever. It's just that a lot of what we hear is a higher percentage of maybe miscues or missed plays or whatever however you want to describe it, compared to what you might hope for or what you might expect coming out of a training camp practice situation where it's set up to try and be successful, perhaps more so than having a real opponent that's trying to play against you. So it's important to remember that, yes, good has happened. And I think that's been a big part of how Justin Fields is viewing this process. He is seeing the progress and also seeing the mistakes, but he kind of comes from it from a perspective of it is coming along. He's seen how they've gone from OTAs to training camp, and he's pretty confident that things are trending in the right direction and will get this offense where they need to be.
Does frustration ever seep in, even though you know it's part of the process? And do you ever wonder, like, hey, does it ever come to you, like, where you think, like, maybe we're not getting as far as we need to go, or that there's an issue? Or
I mean, it's going to come, but, I mean, my competitive nature, I think everybody on the offensive side of the ball is competitive nature. I mean, you're going to want to, be successful every day. But, you want to have a successful play every play, but you also got to know when to take your wins and losses, and I think that's one thing, I need to do a better job this year is when the play's not there, throw the ball away or, check it down. So that's one big thing that, I have to get used to it because I feel like, in college it's just like, you have pretty good players around me, and, we're in the league now, so the defense gets paid too to make plays, but, when the play's not there, just, move on to the next play and get on the next play.
And you said you don't care about, like, the outside noise of the, but is it tough in training camp when so much of this is public, everyone's watching the development, and it's not as smooth as they like?
They're not playing, so, it doesn't really matter. They're not helping us win, so, no, it's really no.
But you see progress where maybe others might not, because it does,
we know, the thing is, we know our offense, we know the plays, we know what's supposed to be going on, but, it's hard to have an opinion on something when you don't really know what's going on the inside, when you're just looking at it from an outside view, so, it's stuff like that, but of course, they want to see big plays, this and that, but, we're playing situational football. We're, 3rd and 4. We're getting the first down. We're not worried about a touchdown at the moment. We're trying to get the first down first, and if a touchdown comes out of it, then, yeah, that's what it is. But, it's, that's why you really can't, take their opinions into account, which, they're entitled to have their opinion, but at the end of the day, like, they don't know what's going on.
Justin Fields is careful to toe a line there of, like when you think about it, he's kind of saying, like, the fans and the media don't know what they're talking about. Is kind of, you read between the lines a little bit there. He's kind of saying that they don't know what they're looking at, and I think there's some valid points there. Like, of course, when you watch training camp practice or whatever, you don't want to see incomplete passes. I think we've seen people talk before, like, especially when it's against air and it's just, positional drills, like, balls shouldn't be hitting the dirt. Like, some of those situational things, like, yeah, anyone can see that that's not ideal and that's not what should be happening. But I think there's also a point to be made there about not everything that you see being exactly what you might think it is. That just we as people on the sidelines that don't know the specific play caller situations, and more importantly here also, watching it live with your eyes is also another part of this. Is like you don't always see the full picture and know exactly everything that's going on. Like, it's one thing when you're watching the broadcast or film and you can slow it down and rewatch it and break it down in slow motion and say, okay, like here's where all the routes were and here's the quarterback's throw and here's the protection, and you can see each thing individually and separately, where even if you don't know the play call, you can sort of figure out generally what was going on and have a sense of what was supposed to happen and what did happen. But when you're watching practice live, right, it's happening rapid, and you're not even at like a bird's eye level, like when you're watching from a television camera, like you're sitting on the sideline. So you really, you can see the quarterback and the throw and the receiver and sometimes the offensive line, right? But like you can't see all of it. And so you can then often miss out on context of like, okay, say that the pass is late getting to a receiver. Well, why was it late? It's easy you can see the what, but we can't always see the whys from the sideline. Not to use the Matt Nagy term there, the why parts, but like that's part of this, right? It's like when the ball is incomplete, is it because the quarterback was inaccurate? Was the quarterback inaccurate because he didn't have a platform to throw from the offensive line? Did the receiver run the right route to the right depth at the right timing? Did they both have the right play call in their brain and on their mind? Were they all on the same page? Did they both read the coverage correctly and run the route based on the coverage that they were facing? Like it's a combination of things that if we had the practice tape and could slow it down and look at all the different moving parts at the same time or over and over again, we could start to better answer some of those questions. But to most of the time here, it's fans and media watching from the sidelines or the little grandstands, and you can pick up some of the what, but not as much of the why, that don't answer then some of the questions of what's wrong. Like we can see that passes are being incomplete and that plays aren't being made to the extent that we might want to. But even Fields talked about there, what all are the goals that they're going through on some of those plays. And that's not that's not to excuse the mistakes that they're making as saying, oh, well, actually there aren't mistakes. No, it's not that. It's just that there's more to miscues, and not all miscues and bad days by the offense are created equal. And similarly, it's like we don't hear when they do something well as a correction to something they may have messed up before, right? We don't have the context to be able to say, okay, Fields misses certain receiver on this play. Maybe later in practice, they practice that same play and complete it, and it's not a spectacular play, and it doesn't go down as like, oh, like great play for the offense at training camp. But if we could see that correction and that improvement more directly by having the context of what each play is going to be, maybe we would end up having a different picture of how these training camp practices are going. Instead, we're seeing, the incomplete passes and whatever the mistakes might be, but we don't get a better sense of how well are they, are they making the same mistakes multiple times? Are they coming back to different plays and then messing up plays the first time they run them and then getting them down as they go and showing that growth and then moving through different parts of the playbook, making the mistakes each time, and that's what we see and that's what we report and that's what we take in. But is it more complicated than that? I mean, that's kind of the big thing, because it's still so early in training camp. I mean, we'll get to some of the timeline aspect of this, but it's still early for these mistakes to be made. It's a different story when it's August 28th or whatever, or it's the final preseason game and the offense can't get lined up correctly. But for now, they're throwing a lot at the wall and seeing what sticks and seeing what these players are and are not capable of, and they will fine tune it from there. It's also important to remember that the Bears are not the only team that don't have perfect training camp practices. Very few teams start out training camp firing on all cylinders and not making some of these mistakes. We'll check in on a couple of relevant teams also having their own share of training camp miscues that don't seem to quite get exactly the same animosity that we're feeling around the fans and the media here in Chicago. Next on Locked On Bears. Wonder if these Bears training camp struggles might make people a little bit hesitant to lay money down on how this Bears team is going to play this season. But if you want to take advantage of their timidness, our friends at BetOnline.net are going to be the place to go. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. You can find all the lines you need for this upcoming Bears season. Odds for week 1 against the 49ers, odds for making the playoffs, over under 6.5 on the win total, odds for specific player stats on how Justin Fields, David Montgomery, Darnell Mooney are going to perform, and so much more. Not just football, all your favorite sports and events. Major League Baseball season in the thick of things. We got basketball futures, hockey futures, combat sports, golf, tennis, soccer, esports, live in-game betting, you name it. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports wagering information, reviews, and news of every league. Head on over to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action happening right now. BetOnline, where the game starts. It's easy to get bogged down in everything going on at Chicago Bears training camp and feeling like, oh man, like why is there all this negative stuff and what's going on here? And is this, are the Bears just like having this terrible time? And you take a step back and look around the NFL a little bit. A couple of other situations jumped out to me that I think will be relevant to you about other teams having some struggles and maybe not as much full-on hitting the panic button over there. Not that every Bears fan is full-on hitting the panic button, but it just feels like it's been bubbling up here as training camp has started. Like, for example, the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Rodgers, right? Matt LaFleur, they've been together for a handful of seasons now. They've been a perennial, but we know how good the Packers have been. But it's like, you would think then with that team coming back with quarterback and offense and that all situation, people coming back healthy for them, training camp should be a well-oiled machine. But like just yesterday in training camp practice, red zone drills, right? We've heard Bears training camp reports where it's like, oh man, like they're struggling to get the ball in the end zone in some of those situations, and they're having to check down or throw it away because they're just not getting open or whatever. But like yesterday at Packers training camp practice, I was seeing tweets. Aaron Rodgers throws an interception to Adrian Amos in the end zone. Receivers dropping balls over there. Jordan Love had a fumble that was taken back for a touchdown. I think he threw an interception as well in those red zone situations. Like even the so-called, well-oiled Green Bay Packers offensive machine is having some, maybe not to the same extent as the Bears. I'm not keeping up on every training camp update from Green Bay, but it's like other teams do have these issues too. And for the Packers, it makes sense in part for some of the same reasons as the Bears. New wide receivers, a few new wide receivers in there for Aaron Rodgers with Sammy Watkins and the rookie Romeo Doubs, and not having Devontae Adams or Marquez Valdez-Scantling anymore. They still have Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb and Amari Rodgers though. So you would think, same tight ends, same running backs, a similar offensive line. You would think that they would be a little bit more sharp than that. Not that they've been, completely dismantled or anything, but just not sharp because, like the Bears and every other team, it's still the beginning of training camp, and everyone over there is ready to relax, as Aaron Rodgers famously said a couple of years ago. Or you look over with the Pittsburgh Steelers and former Bears quarterback Mitch Trubisky. Right, I didn't want to do a whole Trubisky podcast because we're well past that, but they signed him to be their starting quarterback, and you're getting a lot of Steelers training camp reporters tweeting out his completion percentage at practices, and they're going through these red zone drills, and he's 1 for 4 and 0 for 4, and then they're giving Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph more and more reps, and it's looking more and more like Mitch Trubisky's job there in that competition is not going great. And yet, I don't know, do you get widespread panic in Pittsburgh right now? No, because it's two new quarterbacks and Mason Rudolph throwing to new wide receivers that they've never worked with before, learning an offense that they've never been in before, and there's an understanding there that that's going to take time, and that there's still time for those players to turn it around and to improve and to look like what they wanted them to look like entering training camp, and that's okay. That's perfectly reasonable, and I think it's the same standard that we should apply to these Chicago Bears this early in training camp. Like I've been saying, doesn't mean that all of a sudden we should expect everything is going to be perfect and fine by week 1. I mean, no, there could still be some lingering in the regular season, and that can cause some problems here. And that's what we have to kind of keep looking for. Even the preseason games themselves, it's going to be such a small sample size of the starters and even the backups too. It's it's backups against backups. So is that going to be a reflection of how the Bears offense is going to go? No. And if the starters play 10 or 15 offensive snaps and struggle, we shouldn't panic over 10 or 15 offensive snaps in a preseason game. If we go through 3 preseason games and the offense can't put anything together, and all the training camp practices are still messed up and just not solid and consistent, that's when we can start really sounding some alarms here and having some major concerns about this offense and Fields and how everything is going to come together. But on August 5th, as this podcast comes out, it's too early to feel like everything is doom and gloom on this offense and it's not going to come together. It is okay and maybe even expected that they should have some struggles. Maybe they're having a few more struggles than we would have hoped and than we would have expected, but it's not so drastically bad that we need to panic. It is normal to experience these types of growing pains. And again, I don't know that we're getting fully the same accurate reflection on where the struggles are and why the struggles are, because we just don't have the ability to properly assess that as fans and media members on the sidelines watching practice live without getting to know what they're being asked to do and not getting able to watch the film and try and decipher what exactly they're being asked to do. So all of it is this sort of perfect storm as to where the negativity and the criticism and the feelings are, but I just think it's okay to be here where they are right now. It's not the end of the world. It's not a sign of disaster just yet, but it's something we can keep watching for as the rest of training camp into the preseason goes. And if we start seeing some steady improvement, which it seems like we've already had, I think Wednesday was a practice that was largely seen as better for the offense and showing some progress and just incremental. It's not going to get every single day is not always going to be better than the previous day, but a couple steps forward, one step back, couple steps forward thing over time. And I think you can start to piece together some real cohesion here with so many moving parts all coming together with this Bears offense. You can be sure that we'll keep close tabs on how practices go from here on out. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis right here on Locked On Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making us your first listen today. Locked On Podcasts are your team every day. If you're looking for that second listen, we got all your Locked On Chicago sports covered. Locked On Bulls, Locked On Cubs, Locked On Blackhawks, so much more. I mean, college sports as well. Locked On all your teams. Even if you have other non-Chicago teams, we are here for you every single day. So when you're done with Locked On Bears, check out those other Locked On podcasts. Come on back to Locked On Bears on Monday for your next opportunity to bear down.